As usual, we're going to carry on with Bala Aslam's articles, and last week we left off with the freedom article with the subheading, "The Collective's Right to Expropriate the Freedom of the Individual." Now, this article, like we said before, is one of the fundamentals of Bala Aslam's articles. That's written to describe to us human nature and how society works, and how we should be actually functioning in reality in society. And we talked about how humans are social creatures, and we need a social environment in order to function and to take care of ourselves. And this is why we're social creatures. But having that nature as social creatures, we're also looking at the nature of the human species being an egoistic desire to receive pleasure. So our nature is constantly pushing us to a better life, to be better, to have better things, and run away from all kinds of sufferings. And this is how we've developed as humanity. And throughout this process of development, through thousands of years of historical development, we've come to the conclusion that we're actually all a product of the environment. All our genetic structure is from our ancestors. They're all heritage, plus all that heritage mixed up with the environment that we're born in makes out of us a product of society. So depending where you're born, according to your genes, your hormones, and whatever, plus the environment, all of that, not your choice, not anybody's choice. We're just born in this world according to a certain procedure. Right? Although we may not understand it, we can call it random or whatever, but Bala Aslam says reality has a plan. Life has a plan. Call it nature, call it God, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, there's a system that's working, and we're in that system. And as parts of that system, we are being pushed to develop in order to get to that final outcome, which he described it to us earlier in this article. So let's carry on. And let's try to understand our nature, our human nature, how we develop in society, and where our freedom of choice really is. Because if our nature is a desire to receive pleasure, and all our character, personality, all our traits are nothing but ancestral heritage, molded and shaped by the education and the upbringing we got from society, then where can we actually say, I'm free? At the end of the day, I'm like a robot out of protein and just molded by society. I'm just like a functioning machine with certain traits, with a certain software, in a certain hardware, and that's pretty much it. So what really is it like to be human? What does it mean to be human? Where do we really have that freedom of choice? It is a dilemma, and it's been a dilemma even though the regular person out there on the street doesn't really ask himself where he's free. But to all the people who thought about life, it's been a question as to where are we really free? Where is our choice of freedom? Because if we're created like this with a certain nature, it's really not possible for us to have free choice. And this is the kind of recognition that Bala Aslam is trying to bring us to. So it's a very important article for us to digest, to understand, and to work with, because we're going to need to discover where freedom of choice really lies. Okay, so let's get smashing with this. The collective's right to expropriate the freedom of the individual. In the interim, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask. And then we'll try to answer those questions as well. So let me just bring the article here in front of me, and I'll open up the second screen here if any questions pop up. The collective's right to expropriate the freedom of the individual. We must ask further. Things are justified when matters revolve around issues between people. Then we can accept the law of taking after the collective. Through the obligation of providence, which instructs us to always look after the well-being and happiness of the friends. But the Torah, which is the wisdom of Kabbalah for us, obliges us to follow the law of taking after the collective. In disputes between man and God as well, although these matters seem completely unrelated to the existence of society. Therefore, the question still stands, how can we justify that law which obligates us to accept the views of the majority, which is, as we've said, undeveloped, and to reject and annul the opinion of the developed, which are always a small minority? As you'll probably recall from the previous lessons, Baal Salam said that the general public is pretty much ignorant. So this is a known fact, so we don't really have to go and discuss it. But the generality of humanity, the majority of humanity, are uneducated. They don't know anything about life. They just live according to the desire to receive pleasure, and that's it. This is how their lives are. They're born, they try to make the best of their lives, and they end up dead. And that's it. So these are always the majority. So he's got a rightful question. How come we should be following the majority when the majority is made up of idiots? How's that possible? Because the minority, they're the qualitative parts in humanity. They're the ones who actually bring development to humanity. They developed humanity. All the minorities in society that were developed, they were the spearhead of development for human society. So how come now we're going to follow the majority where they have absolutely no clue or an idea about what life is about? So I guess he's going to answer that question. But as we've shown in the essence of religion and its purpose, conscious development and unconscious development, the Torah and the mitzvot were given only to purify a person, to develop in us the sense of recognition of evil, imprinted in us at birth, which is generally defined as our self-love, and to come to the pure good defined as the love of others, which is the one and only passage to the love of God. Accordingly, the precept between man and God are considered tools that detach man from self-love, which is harmful for society. It is thus obvious that the topics of dispute regarding the precepts between man and God relate to the problem of society's sustainability. Thus, they too fall into the framework of taking after the collective. So in order to maintain society's sustainability, we have to go after the collective. So this is an important matter because these are laws of nature. When we're talking about God, you can think of it as nature. So laws of nature are the same thing as the principles of, good deeds, precept, whatever. So all these things, you shouldn't be really getting confused with any religious concepts here or any religious ideas. There's no such thing as such in the wisdom of Kabbalah. In the wisdom of Kabbalah, there's creation. There's a force behind creation, and we're in that creation as part of that creation. And the force that governs the whole of creation, which are called laws of nature, are called nature. So there's a nature, we're in nature, and there are laws of nature that that run the system, and that's us included. We're part of that system, so we're not outside of it. All of these terms might confuse a person when somebody's new to the wisdom of Kabbalah, but if you're new, you shouldn't be here anyway. You should be watching the Education Center lessons from the previous semesters, right? Like lesson 1, 2, and so on. First semester, lesson 1. So all these concepts here are for us to really understand that the society and its balance and its sustainability really depends on this law, which is following the collective. Okay, so this is an important rule, and he mentions the previous articles that he wrote, where that law needs to turn from self-love to love of others. So our nature is self-love. This is why we're egoistic. But in order to balance ourselves with the laws of nature, we have to develop this thing called love for others. And that is what the whole of spirituality is about. This is what the whole wisdom of Kabbalah is. Basically changing, inverting our nature from egoism to altruism in order to balance ourselves with nature. And that balance then elevates us to a higher level of consciousness. And that consciousness can then allow a person to feel above the boundaries of his body inside this new perception of reality. So when we're reading the article, I know it's a bit of a mouthful to digest all the terms and stuff, technical terms and certain terminologies. We have to understand that all of this is really talking about laws of nature and how we need to really adapt ourselves to the laws of nature. And if we don't, life brings us, well, it's not bringing us any lemons and lemonade. As you can see, it's bringing us viruses. So we've got coronaviruses. We have all kinds of natural disasters around the world, from floods to earthquakes. Like I said, viruses as well. This is all chewing up humanity. Why? Because nature is telling us, hey, you guys are out of whack. And if you don't sort yourselves out, I'm going to keep terrorizing you. And this is what nature is telling us. So that we have to read in between the lines here. And as humans, we think we're above nature, which is a very, very stupid thought indeed, because we cannot do anything against the laws of nature. We're completely bending to it. And look what happened now, the coronavirus. The whole planet is influenced by it. So everybody globally, and what's that showing us? Is showing us that we're living in an integral system which includes everyone, including us, and there's nothing we can do about it. We're just stuck with it. So now we're going to go through all kinds of dramas in life as a society and as an individual to bring about this change that we need to go through. So like he said in the previous part of the articles above, he said, listen, we can advance in two ways. We can either sit down and study and grow up consciously, or we can, put our heads in the sand and think it's all going to go over, and we're going to, think it's all going to be over, and we're going to go back to our previous lives. And then, well, if we go in that direction, we're just going to get more beatings in life. So nature has a lot of creative and an unlimited supply of tools in its toolbox to shape us up, to shake us up as well. So by the shaking up, we will be shaping up. So we need to take all of this into consideration, and we need to understand what these laws of nature are so we can actually balance ourselves consciously. So let's read a little bit more. For social life, the law take after the collective. All right, so there's a law in our social life called take after the collective. Let's see what this is all about. Now we have come to a clear understanding of the sentence concerning the freedom of the individual. Indeed, there is a question whether the collective take the right to expropriate the freedom of the individual and deny him of the most precious thing in life, freedom. Seemingly, there is no more than brute force here. But as we have clearly explained above, it is a natural law and the decree of providence. And because providence compels each of us to conduct a social life, it naturally follows that each person is obligated to secure the existence and well-being of society. And that cannot exist but through imposing the conduct of taking after the collective, ignoring the opinion of the individual. Thus, you evidently see that this is the origin of every right and justification, that the collective has to expropriate the freedom of the individual against his will and to place him under its authority. Therefore, it is understood that with regard to all those matters that do not concern the existence of the material life of the society, there is no justification for the collective to rob and abuse the freedom of the individual in any way. And if they do, they're deemed robbers and thieves who prefer brute force to any right and justice in the world, since here the obligation of the individual to obey the will of the collective does not apply. So there are two aspects to this. One is that when we're living in society, we have to be restrained because we can't do whatever we like simply because it causes harm to society. So the society has the right to restrict us to a point where we do not cause it harm. So that's acceptable. So for that, we're taking after the collective. But for other things, which are developmental factors of the individual, it should not be bound by society. So when we want to develop in our ideas in a specific way, and we're trying to increase, let's say, the qualitative existence of the material society, then there's no justice in trying to restrict that individual. And this is abuse of freedom of the individual, and that's what he's saying here. So for this part, let's read it again. Therefore, it is understood that with regard to all those matters that do not concern the existence of the material life of the society, there's no justification for the collective to rob and abuse the freedom of the individual in any way. So the individual can develop qualitatively, which is unrelated to the material aspects of society where it can cause benefit or harm. And according to that development, there's no justification to restrict that person. And that's called, that's the other part of the medallion. So on the one hand, the society has the right to restrict us. On the other hand, for the qualitative development of the individual, it should not stick its nose into it. In the meantime, we've got a question from Francesco. Let's see what he's asking. Is the word law a synonym for the word force that govern the root and branches? That's right, because at the end of the day, what is root and branch? Well, root and branch is cause and consequence. So everything that happens in reality has a cause to it. So this actually is a law. It's an unchanging law. So everything that's that can happen only with a thought. So even with us as well, we want to do something, we have a thought process behind it. So we're not just randomly doing it unless he's a completely unconscious person or someone who's crazy that does things without reason. But in nature, everything is acting on that law, root and branch, because there's a cause and a consequence for everything. That's right. So let's carry on. In spiritual life, take after the individual. That's the new heading. So above, he explained to us that personal development at a qualitative perspective should not be restrained by society. And now this is why he's going to explain to us that in spiritual life, you should take after the individual. It turns out that as far as spiritual life is concerned, there is no natural obligation on the individual to abide by the society in any way. On the contrary, here applies a natural law over the collective to subjugate itself to the individual. And it is clarified in the article, the piece, that there are two ways by which providence has enveloped and surrounded us to bring us to the end. A is a path of pain, which develops us in this manner unconsciously. And two is the path of the wisdom of Kabbalah, which consciously develops us in this manner without any agony or coercion. So he explained to us before in the article that there are only two ways to develop in life, either by suffering or by education. And this is basically what he's telling us here. Listen, if we educate ourselves, we don't have to suffer while we're going to the purpose of life. At the end of the day, everything must develop and come to its planned outcome. There's no running away from that. We all have to grow up. Okay, so we can't stop it. We can't say, I'm going to stop growing at the age of, 21, and that's it. We can't do that. we have to grow up, we have to get old, and it's a process we're going through. So the development is the same thing. Accordingly, what we have to do is now make a choice. Am I going to develop consciously, voluntarily, or am I going to get pushed by life involuntarily and suffer through the process? So this is the choice that we really have. And since the more developed in the generation is certainly the individual, it follows that when the public wants to relieve themselves of the terrible agony and assume conscious and voluntary development, which is the path of Torah, they have no choice but to subjugate themselves and their physical freedom to the discipline of the individual and obey the orders and remedies that he will offer them. Thus, you can see that in spiritual matters, the authority of the collective is overturned, and the law of taking after the individual is applied. That is, the developed individual. For it is plain to see that the developed and the educated in every society are always a small minority. It follows that the success and spiritual well-being of society is bottled and sealed in the hands of the minority. Therefore, the collective is obliged to meticulously guard all the views of the few, so they will not perish from the world. This is because they must know for certain, in complete confidence, that the truer and the more developed views are never in the hands of the collective in authority, but rather in the hands of the weakest, that is, in the hands of the indistinguishable minority. Therefore, this is because every wisdom and everything precious comes into the world in small quantities. Therefore, we are cautioned to preserve the views of the individuals due to the collective's inability to tell wrong from right among them. It's once again a very sharp paragraph. Only two ways to develop: suffering or education. And if we want to develop consciously in education, we have to subjugate ourselves to that individual who's enlightened or who has attainment, so that he or she can show the way to the masses. And the masses have to preserve that individual and that qualitatively developed individual, simply because if they don't, they're just going to suffer in life because they don't have the mind and the understanding to move forward. That's it. So they don't understand their lives. And this is the grim situation that's facing us in humanity at the moment as well. Another question from Francesco. Why do we study corporeal things when we study spirituality? Example is freedom. Why study freedom of society if we want to attain the Creator? Well, for one thing, we live in society. Second of all, when we're studying spirituality, we are a spiritual society. And in order for us to attain spirituality, we have to start from materiality. You see, when we start studying the wisdom of Kabbalah, we don't enter into spirituality straight away. We enter into a corporeal environment. So it's important for us to understand how from within corporeality, from within materialism, that we have to develop spiritually. Not only that, a person who studies spirituality, the wisdom of Kabbalah I'm talking about, obviously, has the responsibility to help other people. So if we want to help other people, if we have to help other people, then I have to know what their state is. So Baal Islam is explaining to us what the state of the world is. Because if I want to hold their hand and raise them and make their lives a bit more bearable so that they can develop nicely, I have to understand what they're going through. I have to understand what the structure of society is. And this is the only way for us to help them, to approach them. Otherwise, we have really no contact with the people on the street. Because you're absolutely right. We want to attain the creator. Why do I need to waste my time dealing with the people on the outside or even try to understand how they live? Who cares? Well, a Kabbalist has to care because the creator's quality of altruism is caring. So if a Kabbalist wants to be like the creator, which is the purpose of life, he has to care. So he's using all his faculties in order to grasp, understand, and therefore explain to his students as well how we can develop spiritually and how the world needs to also develop spiritually as well. And what we definitely don't want humanity to do is to take the path of suffering, because what they will do, just like they've done for thousands of years, is go and kill each other. So we went through the First World War, went through the Second World War, and imagine what can happen with the Third World War now that everybody's got, his finger on the button. Everybody's a bit trigger happy. So anything can really happen. And the Kabbalists are saying, well, this is not a recommended way of developing. And because we live in society as well, we can't isolate ourselves from society. So it's very important for us to understand society, understand humanity, understand ourselves in humanity, so that we can do the necessary things to elevate ourselves and the whole of society, actually, the whole of humanity, to a new level of existence. That's a nice question there. All right, so we can move on and carry on reading. Subheading: criticism brings success. Lack of criticism causes decadence. We must further add that reality presents to our eyes extreme oppositeness between physical things and the concepts and ideas regarding the above topic. For the matter of social unity, which can be the source of every joy and success, applies particularly among bodies and bodily matters in people, and the separation between them is the source of every calamity and misfortune. But with concepts and ideas, it is a complete opposite. Unity and lack of criticism is deemed that source of every failure and hindrance to all the progress and didactic fertilization. This is because drawing the right conclusion depends particularly on the multiplicity of disagreements and separation between opinions. The more contradictions there are between opinions and the more criticism there is, the more the knowledge and wisdom increase and matters become more suitable for examination and clarification. So there are two things here we need to really look at here. On the one hand, within society, unity is the most important thing for society's success. So being a uniform society, being united over physical concepts, over physical, like existing, like our material world. So around those things, the society should be in unity, they should be tight, and they should be together in all principles of their normal regular life. But when it comes to concepts where we're developing new ideas and concepts, then it's the different thing. Then we need more ideas, more contradictions, more criticisms of things that are being discussed, so that we can get every perspective, every angle of the topic covered. So just plain agreement in concepts of development, where we're developing new concepts, is not is required. So criticizing it, looking at it from every perspective, always trying to find the faults in something so that we can develop something really good, is essential. But in society's regular day-to-day life, their unity and a certain system should be adhered to. So the degeneration and failure of intelligence stem only from the lack of criticism and disagreement. Thus, evidently, the whole basis of physical success is the measure of unity of the society, and the basis for the success of intelligence and knowledge is the separation and disagreement among them. It turns out that when humankind achieves its goal with respect to the success of the bodies by bringing them to the degree of complete love of others, all the bodies in the world will unite into a single body and a single heart, as written in the article, The Peace. Only then will all the happiness intended for humanity become revealed in all its glory. But against that, we must be watchful not to bring the views of people so close that disagreement and criticism might be terminated from among the wise and scholarly. For the love of the body naturally brings with it proximity of views. And should criticism and disagreement vanish, all progress in concepts and ideas will cease too, and the source of knowledge in the world will dry out. This is the proof of the obligation to caution with the freedom of the individual regarding concepts and ideas. But the whole development of the wisdom and knowledge is based on that freedom of the individual. Thus, we are cautioned to preserve it very carefully, so each and every form within us, which we call individual, that is the particular force of a single person, generally named the will to receive. So, from an individual perspective, we have to preserve everyone's individuality. On the other hand, when it comes to the social life of the community, then a certain restraint needs to happen. And the society, when it comes to developing concepts and ideas, must ensure that there is a level of criticism, disagreements, so that society can actually flourish by these developed individuals who are using their individual perspectives to develop new concepts and ideas without any restraints. So this is why it's crucial to maintain the freedom of the individual when it comes to concepts pertaining to development of humanity. This is a very important topic. And in countries where you don't see that happening, they're usually backwards, very undeveloped. Why? Because there is no discussion environment. It's a top-down structure. And because it doesn't facilitate discussion, new concepts, new ideas, then they're not getting far in life. So the developed society is always those who bring out discussion, criticism, looking at things from different perspectives, figuring out what's right, what's wrong. And this is a very loose structure, seemingly. However, though, from all those different free-flowing ideas and concepts, you can actually build the perfect system. You can actually look at everything from all the perspectives that actually exist from every individual's point of view. So it makes the new structure that's being built much more stronger, better founded, and obviously more helpful. Now then, the next topic we have is ancestral heritage. Let's see what we have here. All the details of the pictures that this will to receive includes, which we have defined as the source of the first reason, whose meaning includes all the tendencies and customs inherited from his ancestors, which we picture as a long chain of thousands of people who once were alive and who stand one atop the other. Each of them is an essential drop of his ancestors, and that drop brings each person all the spiritual possessions of his ancestors into his medulla oblongata, the elongated brain, called subconscious. Thus, the individual before us has in his subconscious all the thousands of spiritual legacies from all the individuals represented in that chain, which are his ancestors. Just as the face of each and every person differs, so their views differ. There are no two people on earth whose opinions are identical, because each person has a great and sublime possession inherited from his ancestors, and which others have no shred of them. Therefore, all those possessions are considered the individual's property, and society is cautioned to preserve its flavor and spirit so as to not be blurred by its environment. Rather, each individual should maintain the integrity of his inheritance. Then the contradiction and oppositeness between them will remain forever, to forever secure the criticism and progress of the wisdom which is humanity's advantage and its true eternal desire. So all of us are different for a good reason, because these differences enrichen the ideas and the concepts that humanity develop. And this is why our individualism should not be suppressed when it comes to developing humanity with concepts and ideas that are new. And after we've come to a certain measure of recognition in man's selfishness, which is our nature, by the way. So once we understand what our nature is all about, that we're selfish egoists, we have determined as a force and a will to receive, being the essential point of the bare being. We've also learned thoroughly clear from all sides the original possession of each body, which we have defined as ancestral heritage. This pertains to all the potential tendencies and qualities that have come into his source by inheritance, which is the first substance of every person, that is the initial seed of his forefathers. Now we should clarify the two discernments in the will to receive. So he's going back and telling us just briefly that we are an outcome of our ancestral heritage. So all our history, our genetic structure, all our traits, all our subconscious is from all the previous generations. So there's nothing really new in us. There's an accumulation of generations in us, and that's it. Okay? So that's our ancestral heritage. And on top of that, he's saying, well, our human desire, our human nature, is a will to receive. It's a selfish will to receive, an egoistic will to receive. And in that egoistic will to receive are all the qualities that we've inherited from our ancestors. And those are the two things that we are made up of. So let's see how he explains beyond that. Two discernments: A, potential; B, actual. First, we must understand that although this selfishness, which we've defined as the will to receive, is the very essence of man, it cannot exist in reality even for a second for what we call potential, meaning before it emerges from potential to actual, exists only in our thought, meaning that only the thought can determine it. So our selfishness cannot come into action unless we first determine it in our minds. So before the action, there has to be a thought process. But in fact, there cannot be any real force in the world that is dormant and inactive. This is because the force exists in reality only while it is revealed in action. By the same token, you cannot say about an infant that it is very strong when it cannot lift even the lightest weight. But you can say that you see in that infant that when it grows, it will manifest great strength. So there's the potential. So although we are incapacitated to do something at the present moment, we can build potential to do something which is beyond our capacity at this moment. However, we do say that the strength we find in a man when he's grown was present in his organs and his body even when he was an infant. But that strength had been concealed and was not apparent. It's true that in our minds we could determine, since the mind asserts it. However, in the infant's actual body, there is certainly no strength at all, since no strength manifests in the infant's actions. So it is with appetite. This force will not appear in a man's body in the actual reality when the organs cannot eat, meaning when he is satiated. But even when one is saturated, the force of appetite exists, but it is concealed in man's body. After some time, when the food had been digested, it reappears and manifests from potential to actual. However, such a sentence of determining a potential force that has not yet been revealed in actual fact belongs to the conducts by which the thought perceives. But it does not exist in reality, since when saturated, we feel very clearly that the force of appetite is gone. And if you search for it, you will not find it anywhere. It turns out that we cannot display a potential as a subject that exists in and of itself, but only as predicate. Thus, when an action occurs in reality at that time, the force manifests in action. Yet we necessarily find two things here in the perceiving process: a subject and a predicate, that is, potential and actual, such as the force of appetite, which is the subject, and the image of the dish, which is the predicate and the action. In reality, however, they come as one. It will never occur that the force of appetite will appear in a person without picturing the dish he wishes to eat. Thus, these are two halves of the same thing. The force of appetite must dress in that image. You therefore see that the subject and the predicate are presented at once and become absent at once. So the desire and how that desire should be manifested should be visible to us. It should be, as it says here, what I want to eat plus the food should be one of the same thing. Same here, because we're a desire to receive pleasure. We're a will to receive. So whatever I want and its image should automatically be together as one, like both sides of the medallion, like we discussed before. And this is the process. So we have the potential and the actual. So the potential is in the desire and how I imagine it. And the actual is when I go out and do it. So there's the perceived and then there's the attained. Now we understand that the will to receive, which we presented as selfishness, does not mean that it exists so in a person as a craving force that wishes to receive in the form of passive predicate. Rather, this pertains to the subject, which dresses in the image of the eatable object and whose operation appears in the form of the thing being eaten and in which it clothes. We call that action desire, meaning the force of appetite revealed in the action of the imagination. And so it is with our topic. The general will to receive, which is the very essence of man, it appears and exists only through dressing in the shapes of objects that are likely to be received. For then it exists as the subject and in no other way. We call that action life, meaning man's livelihood, which means that the force of the will to receive dresses and acts within the desired objects. And the measurement of revelation of that action is the measurement of his life, as we've explained, in the act we call desire. So this is rather nice finishing. Everything we live, we imagine, we perceive, feel, think, all the pleasures and also the non-pleasurable things as well, the pains and the suffering, everything is depicted in that desire, the desire to receive. And we live in that desire. So all our perception, everything we feel is an outcome of the sensations that are happening in our desire. So we want something and we go and get it, or we want to go and get it. And when we actualize it, all the sensations that we go through is what's called life. So our life is actually nothing but a desire and the sensations that are derivatives of that desire, or the actions that we do in order to attain that desire. Even sometimes we don't get what we want, we still end up with a sensation of we still end up with the feelings that are actually generated from that desire, even though we don't get what we want. So everything in life, basically, everything we go through is from within desires. And this is why Kabbalah sort of also defined a human being as a desire to receive pleasure. That's all we are. So we've got two other questions from Francesco. How do we correct all our left side inheritance? Well, first of all, we have to reveal them. We don't really know what correction is until we reveal what the evil is. So the first thing that a student of Kabbalah, when studying the wisdom of Kabbalah, starts to discover is the evil inside himself or herself. So the revelation of evil is what he called here in the article. And this is what the wisdom of Kabbalah really brings a person to. We begin to discover what we truly are. And once we discover what we truly are, we can then develop the desire to not to be in that state. And already revealing something bad is like really, it's pretty much like fixing it, correcting it. Like you said here, if I see something bad, if I understand it's bad for me, then that understanding already is a correction, because if I understand it's bad, I don't want to do it. Okay, now, a person intentionally doing bad to him or herself can only be a crazy person, madman. So a person, when he discovers the evil, or she discovers the evil inside, they will want to refrain from using that trait in order to cause harm to somebody or to themselves. Because actually what recognition of evil is saying is that I discover bad things in me, and I understand that this is causing harm to actually myself. Because if I cause harm to somebody else, because we're living under the same sky, it's actually causing harm to me as well. So if I come to that understanding that all the bad things in me, if I use them, I'm causing harm to myself. If I use them egoistically, that is, then that's already pretty much a correction. And this is why education is the most important tool we have, because through education, you begin to understand what evil is, and then you begin to refrain yourself from it voluntarily because you have an understanding. And that is already a correction, because you're not using it anymore, because you have an understanding that that is bad. Okay, so that's the first thing. What's the other one? Second part of the question. Exists only in our thought, meaning that a habit, or good or bad, can be blocked. It can be blocked by the influence of the society. So if I have a bad trait and it's visible for me, and if the society doesn't appreciate it, then I'll try not to use it, because I'm just going to be rejected from society. So it's very important for an individual when studying the wisdom of Kabbalah to see all these things inside, and to start kind of like picking them out. I see something bad in me, I start to pick these out, I start to put them aside somewhere, and I start not to use those bad things. And the society can help me, because the society can give me new values. And according to those new values, I can decide not to use certain traits, because I understand that it's not in my personal interest. Because if I do use them, the society will reject me, or they'll punish me, or they'll just simply kick me out. They'll say, listen, we don't want to be with you. This is why we have the jail system. It doesn't work, but we have the prison system, right? It won't work. It's not a corrective facility at all, the way it functions at the moment. But this is what society tells people. Listen, if you don't behave properly, we'll put you somewhere where you stop causing harm to people. So at the end of the day, there are two ways that a person can change his traits. And one is through education, understanding, or the second is the hard way, which is like the prison correction system. And that doesn't really correct, like I said, the person. Just isolates the person from society, so he's no longer causing harm to society, but it doesn't really help the individual to correct himself. It doesn't benefit the society as well, putting a person in prison that way, because the only thing that can really change a person is a good environment where he's educated and he also gets support from society. So without getting the support from society and the education and that, you know, that comfort zone where he begins to understand and work with himself and why and so on, he's not going to change at all. But aren't corporeal sensations different from spiritual sensations? Well, they are, but at the end of the day, we have to start somewhere. So starting from the bottom, that's how we work our way up. So this is also how it is in corporeality when we're growing up. So as a baby, as a newborn baby, we're very limited, we're very restricted. We get, fed, we have our nappies changed, and we're taken care of. So our understanding and our participation in reality is very minimal. We just exist. We don't really do anything. We just eat, drink, and we poop. And that's it. We don't do anything else. So as we grow more and more and more and more, we begin to participate consciously in life. So spirituality is the same way. These are laws of nature and we can't change them. So when a person is starting to study spirituality, he begins to develop himself. He begins to prepare actually himself for spirituality from within this proper environment where he's working. And this is why the environment is really important, because he and now can do all kinds of actions upon myself voluntarily to start tweaking myself, to start making some little change here, little change there, in order to develop myself. And another question, therefore, if you feel an evil sensation after a certain action, corporeally is true and should be corrected, that would be a sin, correct? Well, no. Corporeality and the way we study the wisdom of Kabbalah to attain spirituality is like a playground for us. It's a laboratory. This is where we enter in order to practice how to be in spirituality. So it's like before we go out to work, before we start getting a profession, we go to school, we learn how to read, how to write, how to do maths, and so on. So we prepare ourselves for the real world. And studying the wisdom of Kabbalah is no different. You actually prepare yourself for a spiritual reality. That spiritual reality and perception, which is beyond our corporeal bodily perception, can only be felt if I get out of my self-centered, egoistic nature. And the way to get out of that is if I start focusing not on my self-interest and benefit, but on the interest of others. By shifting, by doing a basic paradigm shift from egoism to altruism, I can then begin to feel a new reality because I've completely changed the way I perceive reality. Instead of, swallowing everything up within and trying to fill myself up, now I'm working in a different way, an opposite way. And that oppositeness brings a whole new perception of reality because you're using everything now in an inverted way. So the spiritual environment becomes a preparation area, a kind of, call it a kindergarten, a school or whatever, where we begin to start playing around with this idea of altruism, how we can be, what we can be, and so on. And by studying the wisdom of Kabbalah and the articles of Kabbalists like we study here, Baal Salam, and we also have Rabash, and all their texts. And as we apply them within the group, we begin to go through these personal changes. And that's when it all comes together. So it's a preparation for spirituality. There is no sin, really. I mean, how can there be any sin if a person is an outcome of the environment plus his ancestral heritage? It's just not possible. So all these concepts of sin and precepts and this and that are really irrelevant. These things are only concepts in spirituality where a person can identify his desire to receive, his egoism, which he then identifies as being sinful if he uses it. And what is a sin after all? A sin isn't something like, oh, I did a big mistake. No, it's just that I revealed something in my nature which is not compatible to the Creator, and now we're going to go and fix it up. So it's not all this, it's not all this dramatic big deal that, religions talk about and depict all kinds of pictures of hell where you get burned and fried and God knows what. It's not like that at all. It's a concept where a person is doing a shift in perception of reality from egoism to altruism. And while going through those phases, he begins to identify what he needs to change. And that's it. So, religion is, as you can all imagine, is in the 21st century, just is completely irrelevant, really. And really not realistic, not logical, and has nothing that you can hold on. It's just all fantasy island, really. All right, so I don't like to use, this is why I don't like to use all these words like sin and precept and all this kind of stuff. It's a bit weird, and it's very much misunderstood by the new generation, rightfully so. So this is why I'm always trying to explain it according to the 21st century person, that all these things are really, life is very simple, okay? We're created in a certain nature, which is called a desire to receive pleasure for ourselves. And this is how we function. And the laws of nature, the general laws of reality, function differently. It functions on altruism rather than getting things. And because our natures are in disagreement and are in conflict, we have problems in life. We have personal problems and societal problems. So all of the problems of humanity are caused because of one thing. Our nature is based on egoism, and the laws of nature are based on altruism. And if we do not reconcile these two natures and make them compatible, we will get bashed, beaten up, smashed, and crushed by nature until we voluntarily want to equalize ourselves to nature and balance things out, because the first law of nature is balance. And if there is no equilibrium, nature will push things to bring about balance. And if we as humanity don't do what we're supposed to do and balance ourselves consciously, because we're humans, we're supposed to take charge of our actions. We're not like plants or animals. We're human beings. We're supposed to develop ourselves consciously. And if we don't take the reins of conscious development into our own hands, then we're just going to be terrorized by nature, rightfully so. And that's the fact of the matter. Gary's asking, going back to the topic of discussion and criticism, isn't it essential for all parties involved to be instructed in constructive criticism. Much criticism today is destructive. Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. The reason is we're not educated in how to discuss things properly, because our nature wants to control things. Every time we have an idea, we want our idea to be applied because we want to control things. And this is how politicians work. You know, they always want their ideas to be taken care of. They want their ideas to be applied and implemented. And this is the most stupid thing, because that's all coming from one person. Whereas creativity, the richness and the right decision can actually be only attained and found when there's a constructive discussion platform. Also, you can call it a workshop platform, which they actually have in the wisdom of Kabbalah, where a group of people can come together and talk in a certain way, where each nullifies himself. And when everybody nullifies themselves and they all add to the discussion, they come up with one common concept and idea, which is actually then the contribution of everyone. So the totality of the discussion group can bring about something perfect, as opposed to that, the idea of an individual can just bring absolute destruction and havoc in reality. So absolutely, there needs to be a certain way of doing it. Obviously, it's not going to be like the parliament that we have, or obviously not there. Those people have no idea. So it needs to be designed in a constructive way. There's a way to do it. In our previous lessons on Thursday nights, we have a session on how to make a workshop and how to hold a round table. If you look at those lessons, I think there was 1 or 2 lessons we did after the third or after the second semester. Then you get an idea of what that discussion is like. It's called a workshop. But you're absolutely right. So there has to be a format. There has to be a mutual understanding of how we're going to carry this out. It's not like we're doing all kinds of criticism. It needs to be constructive criticism. It needs to be for the benefit of the whole, and it needs to include the whole. So this is why it needs to be a very different approach with respect to what you see in real life. So that's a good question. And Francesco is saying, hope to speak with you in the graduate environment. Thank you, Mutlu. You're very much welcome. And today we've come to the end of our Tuesday evening. All the best. Take care. Hopefully we'll carry on with this. 2 creations, A, man, B, a living soul is the subheading that we left at. So next Tuesday we'll carry on with that. All the best. Take care. Bye-bye now.